I could not climb the stairs in my own house when I was 75, and I am 95 years old now. And even today, when I place my foot on the first step each morning, I still remember the quiet fear I felt back then, standing at the bottom, wondering if my life had already begun to shrink. When you are young, stairs are invisible. You move up and down them without thought. They are just part of a house, like a door or a window. I spent most of my life walking up staircases without noticing them at all. I worked in an office building for nearly 40 years, and sometimes the elevator was broken. So I would climb 4 flights every morning with a cup of coffee in one hand and a newspaper under my arm. I never thought about my knees. I never thought about my breath. I only thought about being late. The house where I live now was built in the late 70s. My wife and I bought it when I was still working. It was nothing fancy. 2 floors, creaky wooden steps, a narrow hallway upstairs where the bedrooms sit close together. The railing is smooth from years of hands sliding along it. My children ran up those stairs when they were small, 2 at a time, sometimes 3 if they were feeling reckless. Back then, the sound of feet pounding up those steps meant the house was alive. Later, when they grew older and moved away, the house became quieter. The stairs were still there, of course, but they were used differently. Slower steps, 1 person at a time. Sometimes my wife would call down from the top, asking if I had seen her glasses. Those are the small sounds you miss most when life changes. My wife passed away when I was 72. It was not sudden. Illness has a way of announcing itself long before it takes someone. The house grew very still after that. I stayed in our bedroom upstairs for a long time because it felt wrong to move. Her side of the bed stayed untouched for months. But life keeps moving, even when you do not feel ready for it. 3 years after she was gone, I noticed something strange about my body. It began quietly. I remember one morning I climbed halfway up the stairs and had to stop. Not because I was in pain exactly. It was more like my legs had forgotten how to cooperate. My knees felt stiff and heavy, and my breathing had become shallow. I stood there holding the railing, pretending to study a picture frame on the wall, so it would not look like I was struggling with something as ordinary as a staircase. There is a certain embarrassment that arrives with age, not because you are old, but because your body begins betraying you in small, public ways. At first, I ignored it. That is the way most of us handle things. We assume tomorrow will be easier, but didn't become easier. Within a few months, the stairs had turned into something I dreaded. My bedroom was upstairs, the laundry was downstairs, and the kitchen sat between them. A simple trip from one room to another began to require planning. I would stand at the bottom of the staircase, looking up, calculating the effort. It is a strange feeling when your own house becomes an obstacle. One afternoon, my daughter came to visit. She lives about 30 minutes away. She noticed I was staying downstairs more often and asked why I had moved a blanket and pillow to the couch. I told her it was temporary, but the truth was that the stairs had begun to frighten me. I remember one evening when I tried to go up to the bedroom and my knee buckled halfway up. I caught the railing in time, but for a moment my balance disappeared completely. It was not dramatic, no fall, no injury, just a small flash of fear that ran through my chest. I finished climbing that night, but something had changed. The next morning I decided it was easier to stay downstairs. That decision lasted nearly a year. People think major changes in life arrive with loud announcements. In reality, they happen quietly, through small adjustments that slowly reshape your world. First, you stop going upstairs. Then you stop carrying things that feel heavy. Then you stop walking as far as you used to. And one day you realize your life now fits inside 3 rooms. During that time, I spent many afternoons sitting in a chair by the window. The chair had belonged to my wife. From that spot I could see the small patch of garden behind the house and the back fence where the neighbor's dog liked to nap in the sun. The days were not terrible. They were simply smaller than they used to be. I watched a lot of light move across the floor. Mornings would begin slowly. My joints were stiff when I stood up. I would shuffle to the kitchen, make coffee, and sit again until my legs felt steady enough to walk around the room. The strange part about aging is that your mind remembers a different body. Inside your head, you still feel like the person who climbed ladders and carried furniture and walked through airports without thinking twice. Then your knees remind you that those years are gone. At 75, I believed something had ended. Not life itself, but a certain kind of independence. My daughter suggested installing a small bedroom downstairs. She said it gently, try not to make it sound permanent. I nodded as if it were a practical idea. But when she left that evening, I sat at the bottom of the staircase for a long time. The steps looked taller than I remembered. The hallway upstairs was dark because the light had not been turned on all day. I remember thinking that the house had become divided into 2 worlds. The one I lived in, and the one I could no longer reach. A few weeks later, my grandson visited. He was about 12 at the time. Children notice things adults try to hide. He ran up the stairs to grab a board game from the old closet upstairs and came back down holding it. Then he looked at me and asked why I never came up anymore. I told him my knees were tired. He seemed to accept that answer, but later that evening I heard him telling his mother that Grandpa moved slowly now. Children describe things plainly. That night I could not sleep well on the couch. The house creaked in the quiet the way old houses do. Around 3 in the morning, I stood up and walked to the staircase. I did not turn on the lights. The steps were faintly visible in the moonlight coming through the window above the landing. I placed my hand on the railing and lifted one foot onto the first step. It felt heavier than it should have. I stood there for a moment, feeling the strain in my knee. Then I stepped back down. It was not pain that stopped me. It was the feeling that my body no longer trusted the movement. Over the next few months, something inside me began shifting slowly. I cannot explain exactly when it started. Perhaps it was boredom. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was the quiet realization that if I continued living this way, the house would keep shrinking until there was almost nothing left of it. One morning, I stood up from my chair and decided to walk around the living room more than usual. That was all. I did not make a plan. I did not set a goal. I simply walked from the window to the kitchen and back again several times. The first day it made my legs ache. The second day it felt slightly easier. I began moving around the house more often, not because I had somewhere to go, but because I wanted to remember what walking felt like when it lasted longer than a few steps. The stairs were still there. I did not touch them for weeks, but I could feel something small returning to my body. Not strength exactly, more like familiarity. The joints loosened a little. My balance improved. I started standing longer while making breakfast. I washed dishes without sitting down halfway through. These were ordinary things, but they carried a quiet sense of progress. Then one afternoon I stood at the staircase again. The sunlight from the hallway window was brighter that day, and the steps looked less intimidating than I remembered. I placed my hand on the railing and lifted my foot. The first step felt awkward. The second one felt uncertain. By the third step, my breathing had become louder than I expected, but I kept going. When I reached the top, I stood in the hallway for a long time, looking at the closed bedroom door. It felt like visiting a place I had not seen in years. The room smelled faintly of old wood and laundry soap. The bed was still made the way it had been the last time I slept there. Dust had gathered on the dresser in a thin layer. I sat on the edge of the mattress and rested. I didn't feel triumphant. Mostly I felt surprised. After that day, I did not rush anything. Some mornings I climbed the stairs. Some mornings I did not. The effort was slow and uneven, but something had changed inside me. The staircase was no longer an enemy. It was simply waiting. Years passed quietly after that. My legs never became young again. They still complain on cold mornings. Sometimes I hold the railing more firmly than I used to. But every day I walk to the bottom of the stairs and begin climbing, one step, then another. The sound of my shoes on the wood echoes softly in the hallway, the same way it did decades ago when the house was full of running children. Now the steps are slower. The house is quieter. And I am 95 years old. Sometimes I pause halfway up and rest my hand on the smooth railing. From that spot I can see the living room below, and the window where I once spent so many afternoons sitting still. The light moves across the floor just as it always has. Nothing about the staircase itself has changed. But each morning, when I take that first step, I still remember the man who once stood at the bottom believing he would never climb again. And I wonder, quietly, how many parts of a life can disappear before we notice they are slowly returning?